Morning, Greg Lecker, a painter in Minnesota, Minneapolis, Minnesota. And this is the Arctic Circling Back Saturday morning live edition. And in this series of Zoom demonstrations and throughout the project that I'm calling Arctic Circling Back, I will develop a new body of work inspired by my field studies in Svalbard, Norway, while I share my creative process during a year-long series of virtual and in-person workshops. Connect with the project via weekly social media conversations, Facebook and Instagram, monthly Zoom discussions like today's, a final YouTube video that I will produce, edit, in-person workshops at Gallery Imagine. This project is funded through a Creative Individuals Grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board, received in 2025. This activity is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. I'm going to be switching between two different cameras here. We're currently going to look at the document camera. So I can demonstrate more the near focus elements. So today's demonstration is on block printing with watercolor soluble inks, water soluble, and also some stenciling that was part of the process. And with this, the tools that one uses, it's fairly simple, not necessarily things that you would have on hand, but one can order. The first thing is some sort of a carving material. This is a rubber, probably an 1/8 inch thick rubber. There are also wood blocks with softer or flexible linoleum on top. I've just found that these are a little bit easier to carve. They're very inexpensive. A carving tool, this is Speedball, and the beauty of this is that it comes in the kit with this removable back, and one can put the carving tools, knives, blades, whatnot, into that, and then put it inside, close it up, and then one doesn't lose these elements. I just want to demonstrate a little bit, maybe some of the different carving tools. The first one that I have on is a narrow, and if one is seeing this, hopefully, yeah, this looks like it's more or less in focus. This is the narrowest version, and so one can get fairly detailed lines. Curves are not as easy to do with, like, say, a paintbrush, but it's doable, especially if someone's coming back on oneself. And one has to remember to carve deeply enough that it prints. And sometimes I have not done that, which is why I often do test prints. So you want to be careful changing these out. They are very sharp. Looking down into the barrel, there's a split ball and rings. And for me, it's easier if I remove them and keep it oriented in the same direction so that it's easier for me to find the way for getting the blade into this, because it's a little tricky. She goes in between the inner ball and an outer ring, but then there's the housing also. So this is the next size up, a little bit wider. And I'm just going to be progressing through these. The tool is definitely, it's sharp. They don't seem to dull very much. I just could feel it there. So do be careful. Typically, you're carving away from yourself, and one can, in the kit, typically you get a metal a table hook, which is just a 8 by 10 piece of metal with a little bit of a bent angle that fits over the edge of the table. And then typically you're carving away from yourself. Linoleum block, it definitely makes sense to do that. And this is maybe just a close-up um, of the ring. And you don't want to unscrew it the whole way. I have sometimes got confused and started unscrewing this the whole way to get. So if you can see, the tool slides in and out, and there's a little ring that's inside there, ring and a ball, and that ball is that shiny thing in the middle. And then this is the widest one. You can get a deeper, wider gouge with any of them just by pushing in more or less. Um, I'm going to probably, I'm going to go to the next size smaller. I know what I'm doing. I did carve mostly what I'm demonstrating today um, in advance because it really takes some time to um, carve and to test out with the to see how much detail one is carving. Once one is carved the entire block, then one inks up the block with on a glass plate, which you will see later on in this presentation. But with these sprayers, so one like inks up on the glass block, which is just over here, and then transfers it onto the block. It's a definitely an acquired skill with regards to that. What is very odd, the first time that I did the printing, was that you don't. This is another block print that I had done. So one would ink that up and then press the paper onto this. You don't press the rubber stamp onto the paper like this. It's not like a stamp. Again, it's a little odd. But you press the paper into the carved block, and then using this sprayer. Now, if you don't, I don't have a printing press. If you had a printing press, you could put this into the printing press, and it has extreme weight, and through the notion of these rollers, presses the paper into the block. I just have to stand up and press the paper into this block like so. And once it's not going to slide once you get the ink on it and you move it around because that paper, the ink is almost like a glue. And then you peel it up and then you have a print. And this print was done before. Um, so that is what that is. So the image is always reversed. So one keeps that in mind. If it's a general landscape, it may not matter that it's reversed. Certainly if there's lettering, it matters. And if it's a subject that you're familiar with, it matters. This would be a full block of that block looks like inked out. So that is that. Sometimes I've done it with multicolor inking, and that's fun also, just by moving the ink around. So that is that. Now we're going to go on to demonstrating the piece that I am doing. Now this was an early demonstration months ago, and this was scratchboard. Scratchboard is there are a lot of similarities between scratchboard and block printing. The scratchboard you're carving with tools that are duller because it's just a very thin ink layer on white back paper. And so it just does not have much. This is what it looks like. It's very, very thin. It's really like cardstock thickness. Very matte ink, India ink. And you can see when you scratch it off, you get pure white underneath. So that's how one does scratchboard. But the benefit of the scratchboard is I've already simplified a color picture. Now, granted, it wasn't a lot of color. It was a kind of grayish day. The mountains had some variation in grayish and then a little bit of a brownish. And then the water was reflecting the sky and then kind of darkish, gravelly. Um, but the benefit of this was that I had it really simplified the image into black and white, and that was useful for carving. So what I did with this is I printed it and then I colored the back of it with, it could be graphite. This happens to be um, water soluble chalks. I feel they have a little bit of grease almost in it. It's not really grease, but it's in a way it kind of sticks to the paper. It doesn't fall off as so much like graphite. Now, something that I did not do on this is I did not reverse it. So the prints that I'm doing are going to be the inverse of this, which is fine. It kind of teaches me the difference between seeing a water subject coming from the upper left to the lower right or from the upper right to the lower left. Um, so I think because I'm right-handed, I think generally things go left to right, but I appreciated the fact that it was reversed. I'm also doing stencils on this piece, so it saved me a bit of time in terms of the um, carving. It's easier to carve some stencils um, than to do all the different color blocks. Now I'm going to show you these are not finished versions, but it's going to be nearly finished versions of what I will be printing today. So in this case, I wanted to have the distant mountain in the grayish blackish, the brownish hills in the foreground, foothills, the water reflecting the sky, and then the foreground. Now, the sky, it's a doing sky with scratchboard or with block printing is a bit challenging. Uh, one doesn't have all the variation that one has in paint. Um, so that's just something to keep in mind. Um, I might have, and I'm depending on what I want to do, I could go back in with watercolor and highlight some of the other areas of the sky to leave the brightest areas of the sky. But in generally, I'm happy with the note with how that turned out. Um, regards to the way the stenciling worked is that, and in the past I've done it just with paper, but this I felt that it worked better with the stenciling with this acetate. It's actually file folders. It's a little bit thicker than acetate, and it's flexible and it doesn't crack as much. So that was useful. So the first layer here was um, the mountain, the foreground, and then some. Uh, I found some area of the water that I felt, again, this is the reverse area, but I felt that this area, which is this area and this area going back, looked like it wanted to be a mass of darkness, darker than the sky, but or at least more full than the sky at any rate. Um, so that's that. So this was one layer of the stenciling that I carved. And again, if you look at the image here, it's reversed, but it's that central mountain or peak, and then some of the areas, and then the foothill here. So the second one then that I printed, or maybe been the first, whichever. Oops. This one, and this one has, and this actually has serves two purposes. One, it's the foothills that one sees, and two, it's some areas, that's a little sticky there. Um, Some of the what I've identified as some areas that I needed to pull up the contrast a bit more on the final print that it doesn't really show up on the scratch board, but it does when I look at the photograph more that certain areas were a little bit darker. So you will be seeing me doing that stenciling on top of the finished block print, just to add a little bit more detailing, bring out some contrast. So I'm not going to lose that. I'm going to put that on top of the computer here. Actually, and if you wanted to see what that looks like, it's this. And I realized I did not do this part, but I will. So this doesn't have the colors. This is just one pass, and it was an early pass, but it has some of those areas of extra dark that I'm going to print in black. The other ones that I'm printing, I'm not going to print in black. I'll print in a bluish gray, and then also um, a uh, bluish gray black, and then a lighter bluish white for the sky. So that's what that is. So this is the block. An important thing also to remember now, it was very easy with the stencils to key them one on top of the other because I cut them to be the size of the paper. And so if one layers them on top of each other, it's automatically going to key one on top. And that's easy with regards to the stencil. Unfortunately, it's not as easy for the block print because you need to put block the paper down face down. And how do you see how close you are unless your block is the same size as the paper? And that's generally not done. Generally, there's a frame of white left around a print for presentation purposes and also for framing purposes. So the way that I did this, and I've done it a couple different ways, but I used another material that is very thin, but still has some thickness to hold the block in place. The block is just sitting there on top. So it allows me to ink it up, take it out and wash it, and then put it back. And I'm going to do just a little bit more carving just so you can see the carving effect going on. And this is water soluble ink, so block prints want to be protected, very similar to what watercolor itself would be. Um, one can do ink instead, and that works fine. I mean, ink. It's all ink. Oil-based ink. That takes longer to dry, and it's also messy. This is easy to clean up with just soap and water, really just water. But as I was looking at this piece, um, what I'm going to do is I'm going to carve a little bit more of this area in the print because I realized on some of my prints, it felt fairly heavy in that area. Um, and so I just want to carve that heavy in terms of a lot of black here. And I felt like it needed to have a little bit more relief. One of the things that I did, the reference photograph that I had here, I zoomed in and then I created some elements that were rocks that were a little bit bigger here. And I did not carve these deep enough is the problem really. So that's what I'm going to be doing here, which is why I had this medium blade. So hopefully you can see this. And I'm going to press a little bit more than I had done with my first. Um, whether or not um, you're seeing that, yes. Um, whether or not you see what you've carved in a print depends on how well you're inking up the print, how thick the ink is, how watery it is. It generally you don't really add water to the ink; it's fine just as it is. But I often do add a little bit of water to it, that because it dries very quickly, and as you're printing a series of prints, even if it's as simple as just 10 prints, it seems to dry very quickly. And once it starts drying on the block, with water-based, it's easy to clean up. With oil, it would be more difficult, although it would last longer and it would not dry up as quickly. But it's going to be easier and your details are going to be sharper if it does not dry up on there. And if one's doing more than probably 10 or 20, or maybe 20 prints, probably is going to require pausing and cleaning the block and then re-inking it. Um, and yes, I am carving towards me, not normally done. I'm not exerting much pressure, and this is not linoleum block, so I'm not pressing very hard. Um, and I'm going to just refer to the scratch board a little bit. One of the things um, that I learned on the scratch board is I had overworked. I'm going to put this up here and just talk about it. I had overworked some portions of the scratch board. I lost a lot of the motion of the water. This was still strong, this element, but the flow of the water, the melt water coming from the distant glaciers and whatnot down this very small depression just really started to get lost, and I was not happy with it. Um, and so that I've solved by um, carving carefully, doing some test prints, and then going forward. And by the test prints, what I mean is that I had started last night by carving, and um, these were some of the first ones. And I'm happy with this, all of this, and that seems fine. Um, I may be slightly less happy with the way that I'd stenciled this part. This part next to this, I'm fine with because I see some contrast. Here, it's not as much contrast between what's underneath. So I'm going to save this as I'm doing my final inking of this, and I'll keep this bluish for the water because I feel like this really reads well as water reflecting the sky. But this area is going to need to have more some blackish color, not on this blue on the stencil because I can't go back and redo that, but on the print that I'm going to be doing on top of this. And that's going to be a bit of a challenge because uh, it just is going to require looking at the portion of the block, which is this area, and then inking that part. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark that with a permanent mark. I'm not going to rub off with the cleaning so that I can see where I want to ink up something with not the bluish white, just grayish, but more the bluish blackish. So I'm going to just draw a little bit on here. What I want is I want contrast between the stencil, um, which is going to be the white here, and the top coat, which is going to be darker. So I'm going to just try to draw. Um, this is going to be done with a roller that is this size. So it's really not going to be a lot of detail. It's really going to be probably just like a whoosh. Um, but, and we will see how that works. It's going to be a learning experience here. But this goes up. So I'm doing mirror image and slow this down or lay that down so it's a little bit lower here. So not that. Benefit of the block printing, A, it allows you to get multiple blocks, multiple prints of something. B, for me, it helps me to simplify the pictures that I'm making and connecting my masses And it is translating, it's, I believe that is helping me be a better painter and better artist in general as I go along. Um, and I don't mind if the rest of this is not the is not going to be the darker. What I'm saying by darker, I want to ink it with this color instead of this color. So, and it's fine if it's going to be a version. So, at any rate, so this area I want to print, and I might carve just a little bit more of that because as I look at this, I see that some of these areas that I wanted to leave lighter to see that this bluish color shining through are not are not deep enough. So again, look and see. It's a little challenging when the reference photograph is not. So this is this far side, which would then be this near side of it. So that is the part that gets just a little slightly confusing. So I can see the lines here light, but I want to make them more deliberate. So I'm just going to go through each one and just darken it. Darken it, meaning that I'm carving more out of it. Um, which then is going to let that be white, and the other areas are going to be black. Um, and here I see these curving areas, which I really like. And I'm not going to switch to the other blade because if I do that, then my risk is not carving it deeply enough. And if it's not deep enough, then you're going to carve it again, and you can't always do that. So if you can see what I'm doing here, just kind of making slight curly cues, trying to show the motion of the water, the ripples. So I want the contrast between this being blackish gray against that stencil that was already the bluish. It's going to make more sense when I carve it. There's a lot of, it's much like a game, this printing, because, well, there's not just the reversing that is important for a person to remember that it is reversed. So think about that. But to think what order of colors you're going to print, what are the items that are the most important that you want to carve out, maybe what you're going to simplify. These images are fairly detailed, the details that I was starting with. And a person could say, well, maybe take a simpler image, but that's not the those are not the images that I typically paint. I typically paint something that has more detail. So and you don't create a lot of mess with with these air with the refuse, but you do need to keep that off the block. And sometimes with this rubber, pull out the pieces a little bit. Um, and these blades maybe have dulled slightly. I mean, I just caught the tip of it with my finger and I could feel it, but it didn't hurt at all. Of course, I wasn't exerting any force. Um, I'm just looking a little bit more to see what is here. So a little bit more curves, slight curves here, which I feel like just were not deep enough to read when they were printed on top of that blue stencil. And it's possible that my ink went down into some of the details. And you'll see when I do the inking how, and I am going to switch to the other blade just to carve some of this a little bit more. I'm seeing that I lost some detail there. I'm wiping a little bit of mess here. I got the paper into the inked glass plate. So it's not completely dry. I'm going to you will see the inking when I get that. So again, what I'm doing is here, this part, when this draws back, I want these elements to be more contrast between the lighter areas that are here and the darker. And there's not much contrast now because this I had inked with the same color as the water, which is fine, but I wanted this to read more as the gravelly and then have the water ripples on top of that. So there'll be ripples that are lighter blue and then ripples that are white and then ripples that are lighter blue against bluish, blackish, grayish, and then lighter white against blue. It will make a little bit more sense when it's done. So it will be multicolored compared to what this is, if that makes any sense. And I'm liking parts of this, like I like this. This was two different colors that I let blend together. So we have a little bit of a harder edge here because of the stencil that I had already done, and then the water here. So, um, and it might be something as I paint this today, I will think about what I had inked up and done overnight and this morning as I finish up the painting of that. Now, yes, it's reverse image, but I may not, I may bring in the block print just to show folks that are visiting the gallery today what I did. Um, so, and there were some gravelly pieces here and there. I don't want to overdo this again, but just very easy to do. But I felt like some of these needed to be slightly deeper. It's cross hatching a little bit, but it's not the easiest thing to do. Different than like pen and ink. Different, but also a little similar in ways. Some of these rocks, it just some of them are deep enough, but some of them are not. And scratches and whatnot, scratches in the granite or the gravel. Other ones just are not deep enough. It's too easy for the ink to fill that in. Especially, I tried a couple different things. Sometimes I wet the paper a little bit when I press into the block. And in that case, then it softens some of the images, and I'll show you what that looks like. Um, and I also sometimes print on watercolor paper, and then sometimes print on print paper. The print paper shows more detail. The watercolor shows less. But one of the cool things about doing this on water soluble ink is that one can go back in and do some watercolor touching up of some areas of the print, which I think adds a lot of interest. And in the Chevron series that I had done in 2024, the I had done block prints of the Chevron logo and then watercolored on top of it. And I could scratch into some of the watercolor, and then I could also dilute it in paint and blend it because it's water soluble. So it was an interesting effect. And so there was an overall pattern of the Chevron logo in the background because it was, well, if you read up about the bridging troubled water, you'll learn more about it. It had relationship to the Chevron court case that was overturned during the time that I was doing that project, that art project. So I may want to try to connect some of these elements slightly. I want to have time for the printing so you can see what some of the different effects look like. Um, because this carving, this is not the most exciting thing in the world for a person to see. It took several hours to carve the block that I printed last night, not last night, this morning early, and did a couple other test prints several times. And you do not want to watch all that carving. I'm just deepening some of these a little bit. I'm probably going to look back um at the print. I'm going to back at this one, which is ink. I'm not going to print this dark, but the contrast helps a lot with seeing whether some of these areas were carved deep enough. Now, as I turn this, put this down and draw it backwards, I can see where the areas are that worked. So these are some of these elements, and these are these elements. Some of these were too fine and they filled in. Some of them stayed. Some of these I feel like need to be enforced just slightly. These ones read fine. They did not fill in. These I think were generally okay. Some of these. Some of these maybe need to be slightly deeper. And it's okay to have some variety of it starting off thinner and then getting thicker. And some interest. Like I said, I'm going to switch out the carving tool. Um, so this not going to go quite down to the smallest, but I'm going to go down to this one. I've never really used this. I tried that yesterday. I couldn't really make. I'm going to have to research what that is used for. I've not really found something that makes sense for that. So you want to tighten this down first before you turn it over and put all your tools back. It's very easy to lose these otherwise. And then don't believe that you can really just order one. You're going to order a whole kit of them. And they're also sharp. So if you definitely not want to step on them with bare feet, that would cause injury. Um, and it would cut other paper here and there. So again, I'm looking at this and this to see where I felt like some of the areas need to be reinforced a little bit more. Some of this, perhaps, which are sloping areas of the landscape coming down. Now, this was printed before even some of these um, the improvements that I made just this morning. Um, some of these areas, I know I'm right on top of it, but if I don't get right on top of it, I can't see the detail enough to carve it. So I like the details, but they were not deep enough to be printed. So I'm just going over them. I don't need to look at something because they're already carved into the block. I'm just reinforcing them. And they're all just representing the ripples that I saw in the scratch board and that I saw in the photograph and certainly witnessed while I was watching, looking at these various elements. And again, these were some of the runoff of the glacier melting down. Um, and the glaciers, as they melt, they're going to be some people I've heard it called glacial flour. In a way, there's sometimes sand and grit and sediment that's in the melt water. So in some areas it brings some nutrients down, can bring in nutrients down into the water even for marine animals. Ready to do some printing, and I will do some. It will take a couple test prints to do just to get the ink the right consistency on the block. And then also I'll do some where it's a wet paper and then with a dry paper so you can see the difference between some of those different effects. Now the wet, and I'll do it both with the watercolor paper and the ink paper. The printing paper, that does not take to the water very much because it's just flimsier paper. The watercolor paper does hold itself, keeps some rigidity. It's fine. Don't want to overdo this because remember, I'd overdone this and I lost. This just became a mess here. You do not realize looking at these two again, they're reversed, but still, I liked some of the effects of this. I don't like some of this. This is still graphically strong enough that it reads. This this gets lost. This is fine in both cases. Different, and this is fine. This is a little muddy. The printing did not work well. A little bit too thick and runny. And this was before I had carved the mountain more, and certainly before I had carved the sky. This sky was not carved enough. Um, I've since carved the sky much more deeply. If you look at this, some of these test prints. So this mountain compared to this mountain, you can see it's not just a question of inking more of the sky or less of the sky. I went back into this sky and carved a lot more out of it. You're not, it's not, oh, if I turn that a little bit, you can maybe see I carved opposite directions and cut out some chunks, and some of those chunks felt like red, even better than some of this effect. What they were some of the glowing sun peeking behind some of the clouds that were here, which is really tough to do in a drawing, much easier to do in paint. I'm liking a lot of this. This was still done on dry paper, whereas this was done on the wet paper. It's more twinkly. There's some softer effects here and there. Um, Definitely variety in terms of um, the blackish grayish and the bluish. And every ink or every block print is slightly different. This was after I'd carved more of the mountain. This was less of the mountain carved, but both of them still had the sky carved. Um, this probably had a little bit more carving in the foothills as well. So that's what I'm calling this was the middle one. This was most recent. This was just before the class. These were some with just all the same color across. This was before I had carved the sky more. That sky is just, it's printing too dark. This is with the sky, more of it removed. Um, so it's a learning experience. Um, so like I said, we're almost ready to print. I'm leaning towards printing now because I want to have time for some of it to dry up so that I can do that black detailed block on top, the stencil. And that is going to require the ink to be drier. So, okay, that's that off the, wipe it off. It's not going to come completely off. This was my notes about using the grayish, the stencil brown, gray, etc. So I don't need that anymore. I need my area to be clean. I'm going to need this stencil and I'm going to need this block. And those are the two things that I'm going to be printing on. Card these areas. So I need my key to be set up. And now I'm going to just move this over. Move this up. We're going to move this out of the way. Don't need that anymore. Get the braiders ready. Get the block set up here. that we're going to try watercolor and block paper. So this is the watercolor. It's fairly heavy duty. Let me just get one of those. I'm going to get more of the prints of the paper. It's acid free, still quality, good paper, just a lot cheaper than the watercolor, so I can show you wet and not wet. And I'm printing it on the smooth side of the watercolor paper, so probably a little bit tough to tell, but there is a smoother side. I'm standing up now at this point. The reason I'm not filming myself because I'm just moving around so much, so that you can see what is going on. I'll just adjust that ever so slightly. And I'll be switching between. Let's see if it helps to go to the other camera. Slide that over slightly. Block print at the same time. So this is the inking plate. It's glass. The benefit is that it's very smooth, which is very important because and I need to get some. I have a sprayer here with water, which is useful just to manage the uh, that bluestone color here, um, called bluestone. Has some. I don't want to mix that into the sky, but I do want to have it in some of the black. This is black, mixing it with some of the bluestone, and I'm going to probably add some blue to that also. Um, I'm going to just wet this. It's easy enough to regenerate the water soluble ink once it dries up slightly by adding just a touch of water to it. Um, just not too much. That is the too much, then that's going to go down into the. Now we've got that sprayer ready. This needs to get back here so it's in focus. Okay. Hopefully that if I don't jiggle that around, just wait, just too much. I just want to get this. It's a bit of a feel in terms of how wet or how pasty the ink wants to be. This is too, that is too wet, but it's at least something that I can at least mix on because it's really the ink is so gummy and the it's so gummy and fairly thick that it's easy for it to squeeze through the underside, breaking the bottom of this tube. It's not great. I'm gonna not add just a touch of the blue over here so I can draw it to both sides. There's no reason I'm doing black for the black and that for this, but it just is. But the friction needs to be overcome just slightly. And again, with water soluble, it can come back to life again even after it's dried on, which I find to be useful because there's costs associated with art materials. So um, so I'm slowly blending some of these colors together. What I'm doing is I will be looking at, fortunately, these colors this is too dark, remember. This I feel it's probably good. I like that. That was having to be the wet paper. I'm happy with that also, although I can't get that effect again because it was just too thinly printed. This is the stencil we will be doing at the end with the black. So I want to get some prints done with the bluish, blackish, grayish. It's a lot of description all on top of each other. I want the bluish, grayish, whitish. I don't want it to be sky blue, but I want it to be um, I want to I desaturate it a little bit by mixing a little bit of the grayish. There was a little very some grayish um, on the plate and even just on this edge, so it's easy enough to do. I don't feel like that's too sky blue. It's light enough. It's pretty close to what the color that is, which I'm happy with. And you have to work. You can't muddy around just too much because the ink sets up fairly quickly, especially if you're doing multicolor on one um, plate. Um, Again, it's a feel. Um, it wants to be slightly tacky. Multiple passes with less ink work better than heavy ink because you do not want the ink to set up down into the. Um, so this is where I'm not going to talk. You're just going to watch because it's tough to talk um, at the same time. And I'm going to switch cameras here because the document camera shows a better shows this better. I'm going to slide the plate just forward. That was just the water bottle falling off. Um, Spray the wet paper. So there, hopefully you can see the whole thing that I'm doing there in detail. So we're going to do the sky. And like I said, multiple passes. It's going to take a little bit of time to ink up the block because and it does not absorb the ink, but it's hard to describe exactly uh, what I'm doing. It's a feel. Okay, now I have covered over those marks somewhat, so that's not great. Um, and I want to ink it all in one pass, so I cannot uh, I don't want to set up before I get some of these areas on there. Again, multiple passes. Multiple passes are better than not in the. You can see now the areas that are it's going to be a test. We do not know if we have enough ink on there yet. have to work quickly because this can set up and not be wet enough to transfer onto the paper if I don't hurry. It's not printed on the stencil yet because I want to see how it's printing. Do I have enough? So we'll draw it back and see. Not bad, but it needs more ink. Okay. The front is fine. This is not enough. This is not bad. That's why I don't want to uh, ruin the stencils that I had done. So and what I've found doing this is that sometimes it takes a couple passes to get the block inked enough that um, there needs to be enough ink on the block that it can transfer onto the paper without, and we're going to be over, I apologize, um, over time. That's what I'm saying. Um, I will do um, one of the stencils at the end to show how that black on the stencil at top, but we need to get the inked paper to dry enough that it will transfer. Let's see what this looks like. That's better in general. Um, more ink, more ink is needed. So I feel like it needs to. I am not a pro just yet when it comes to um, the amount of moisture in the ink or on the block, I should say, not in the ink. I feel like some of it is probably a relationship to the fact that the more blocks, more impressions that you draw, then there has been more ink transferred onto the subject, onto the plate. The recording will show the whole process, and for folks that are still hanging out, I'm not going to wet the paper until the end because that is going to affect the impressions for the other prints. And I'm not going to print all the stenciled pieces. Um, because it can take several hours to print and to do it carefully. But I will at least do one when I get an impression here that I'm happy with, and I know that I've got enough ink on there. Maybe I'm not pressing hard enough, but let's see. That is better. Um, so not bad. I'll get some of the other darkers on top of that. Because the stencil has already, so more moisture on the plate, a little moisture in the watercolor. Sink into the paper just slightly. It's blurring the stencil ever so slightly, but that's fine. More white onto this. Combination. Yeah, this works. It's already dried somewhat, but that just watercolor paper being a little bit thicker, it's harder to get the paper pressed into the um to the print, into the plate, I should say. Um, the wetness helped a little bit. How this looks. Not bad. That's pretty good. Happy with, especially the sky. I like the effect of the water in the sky. So I'm gonna get some of those papers be-wetted so that they can absorb a little bit. It's definitely a learning experience in terms of how much water, how little water, and the other paper too. We're just now printing on just the paper itself. I'm not doing the test prints. So I feel confident that combination of the paper being wetted slightly and the amount of ink that we have on here is going to work. It doesn't help to be caught. Sometimes have to be courageous in terms of getting the ink on there. I'm often doing the printing in the basement, and I'll have another plate handy that has sometimes some water in it. Um, say some water in it. What I mean is some other colors with another bluish, whitish. uh, you really can't get another print out of a piece that makes any sense. Once the paper is printed on, then it's you'll never get the register line up again. I've tried. It doesn't matter as much what the backside of the paper looks like. I guess if it was graded, maybe it would. I'm just trying to keep the batten from getting too much into the ink that are smeared um, with my fingernail. See how this works. That I'm mostly happy with that. There's enough variation that it makes it interesting. Um, I'm letting the regular paper set up just a little bit more because it's very flimsy right now with the water. It's okay. It's a little bit lighter in this area. Sky looks good though. Need a bit more blue onto this plate. Um, Water too. I can always make more of the stencils too. Um, it's not like I've destroyed the stencils. There will be a life to the prints, to the plates, I should say. A little bit more brilliance in the blue. That's fine. Um, I need to clean the plate slightly. I feel like there's a little bit of uh, ink getting down into the, yeah, getting down into the, we're gonna try to just draw a regular print paper out of this. Hopefully suck up some of that excess ink from the plate without having to wipe or clean that whole plate, because that's be going to the gallery shortly and doing the painting demonstration. So I will continue more of this later on. Works with more paint on the plate, but not wetted paper. And not great, but maybe cleaned up slightly. I can try to clean up oh, the plate just a little bit. Areas of the mountain that are just so that we've lost detail. A bit of this area too. Uh, See if that helps. Hopefully that helps somewhat. Possible that a little bit of the water move the ink down into the um, down into the plate. And it's just possible that um, see how the wet, slightly damp ink printing paper works here. Imagine the humidity of an environment makes some difference in terms of how fast the paper absorbs and um, the transfer is better in general. So think that the plate needs to be cleaned at this point. A lot of impressions about cleaning. There's some that work, some that don't. Some that I feel like probably had some interest. Um, may try. I'll try later the stencil on the black. Maybe I'll try one or two of that. Let's see, what's the block? This one at least. This is dry enough. I could probably do that stencil on that to see what that looks like. And this is applied via a brush, not block print. That makes any sense. And it's just these areas, which is tough to tell. Let's see. That's too black to be able to see that really. But this one is light enough that it probably would read through. It will take a little bit of trial and error to get. This one at least. This is dry enough. I could probably do that stencil on that to see what that looks like. And this is applied via a brush, not block print. That makes any sense. And it's just these areas, which is tough to tell. Let's see. That's too black to be able to see that really. But this one is light enough that it probably would read through. It will take a little bit of trial and error to get. Trial and error in terms of how much water too on the brush, because it has to be thinner than, but it's going to be the black. Can't be so thin that it's a little bit of blurriness is okay, but don't want much. I have to remember where. Harder I realized to see. Correctly because the paper was not printed directly in the center, but so it's going to show the contrast. Not bad.